because there were so many things wrong with the original case of Rikki Neave, this is a really difficult documentary to watch. Difficult for the right reasons, because of course it plays on emotions and tugs at the heartstrings, and it really is very emotional. But also, I don't necessarily agree with the conviction. I'm not saying that they got the wrong person, but I don't think there was enough evidence. And I will explain what I mean by that towards the end. I won't give any spoilers for just now, but if you're unaware of Rikki Neave, and I wasn't, I was 2 years old when this happened. Rikki Neave didn't return home when he was 6 years old in 1994, and his body was found dead not that far away from his house. He was completely naked, and at the time they focused heavily on his mother, and there was a lot of bias. The police were pretty convinced that his mother had done it, basically because there were a couple of black magic books in her house. Now, if having crime-based books is going to frame somebody for murder, then I'm absolutely screwed, as are most true crime fans. And a lot was done wrong. Now, I will say there was never anybody convicted. I won't say exactly why that happened. I don't want to spoil too much, but his mother was imprisoned. And I have to say I'm surprised by that, because from what we were told, yes, there was a level of neglect towards her children, but this was the 90s, and discipline was very different in the 90s, and parents, smacking a child in the 90s, I'm not saying it was the right thing to do, but certainly most parents did it, and I feel like what she was sent to jail for 7 years, many parents would have been, and I think they were just trying to get her with something because they couldn't get her with the murder. And finally, that aside, many years later, nearly 30 years later, this 24 Hours in Police Custody two-parter digs up that case and tries to solve the actual crime, with no suggestion that it was the mother. They kind of rule her out very quickly, and realise that there was never any evidence against her, never any proper evidence against her. And I have to say, it's very fascinating, it's very gripping, it's very well told. There's a fantastic use of footage from the time. There's a chilling series of stills of his clothing that were found, the clothing that he wore that were stripped. That was pretty harrowing to see the actual clothing. So the actual two-parter is very well put together, it's very emotive. I was desperate to find out what happened, and I really hope that they did find out what happened, because sometimes there are documentaries like this where they don't find out because they start making it. They put a lot of time and money into making this documentary, but they never know what the outcome is going to be. And I will say that there is some kind of resolution. I won't say what just now, but I will with a spoiler warning in a moment. I felt not 100% convinced that they'd had enough evidence, and again, I'll explain what I mean by that, but I'm not... Yeah, it's great that somebody's finally been convicted for this, for the murder of Rikki Neave, but at the same time, I feel like there wasn't enough evidence, so I'm not 100% convinced they got the right person. I'm not saying they definitely didn't, it's very probable, but I don't think it's beyond reasonable doubt. But clearly the jury disagreed with me. But it's still a satisfying conclusion from a viewing perspective, and yeah, 6-year-old little boy. It is... I choked up quite a few times, and to think what his mother has been through in those almost 30 years, first with losing her child, and then being accused, and then being imprisoned for something that, yeah, it wasn't the best parenting in the world, but again, is one I feel, parenting has changed a lot over the last 30 years. The only thing that concerns me is that the school didn't ever contact, as far as we're aware, didn't contact home to say, hey, your 6-year-old little boy's not come home. And I feel like this is entirely, well, no, it's unfair to say it's entirely the school's fault. That's ridiculous. But if the school had phoned home at, say, 9:10 and said, your son's not here, can you confirm his absence? Alarm bells would have been ringing, and maybe his mother would have gone out to look for him. It's never exactly clear why Rikki didn't go to school, or why he didn't get to his destination, because the timeline sets things at happening a little bit later on. So there's still a lot of uncertainties about what happened, and if the school had just phoned home, then it could have been a completely different story. In the second part, one of the investigators does mention very briefly that at this time a lot of children were playing truant. So maybe the school was just so fed up with children not turning up that they didn't bother to phone home anymore. But again, you'd think for a 6-year-old little boy. But then maybe they would have assumed that a 6-year-old would have been brought to school by his parent. So if he hadn't turned up at school, then clearly his parent knew where he was because his parent would have took him. So maybe that's their excuse. I don't know. But I just can't help thinking that if the school had phoned home and reported the absence, then none of this would have ever happened. And I think schools nowadays are a lot tighter on that kind of thing. But even in the 90s, absence was still reported. Nevertheless, it is gripping, but not without its frustrations. So, the spoiler from now. I'm not going to say who it was. I'll try and not spoil that much. But they convicted somebody. And I still feel like it was heavily circumstantial evidence. The only thing that swayed me to thinking that this person was guilty is that they kind of changed a bit of their statement. A bit of their statement was adapted or added to, as the investigators point out, probably because of forensics. But at the same time, there was no real motive. It was circumstantial. And yeah, again, I think probably this is the person. I feel like they probably do have the right person. But based on what this documentary is presenting to us, there does not appear to be enough evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And I just hope they've got the right person. Because if not, it means there's a killer out there still. But I do feel like they probably have. But nevertheless, I did end it feeling not 100% convinced. But at the same time, can you ever be 100% convinced unless you get a confession? I guess not. Really enjoyed it, of course, for the right reasons. Found it very frustrating for the wrong reasons. It's definitely worth watching if you're a fan of true crime, and in particular if you like 24 hours in police custody, because it is the usual high quality that we can expect from their episodes. Really thoroughly enjoyed it, but definitely not without its frustrations.